I know, I'm sorry. All right.
It's okay.
Okay, well, welcome to today's Access Chat. We're really excited to interview our partner and one of the founders of Access Chat, Neil Milliken. He is with Atos and lives in England, and I believe most people watching this will know him because he's infamous. Ooh, he's very well known. So, welcome to Access Chat, Neil.
Hello, Deborah. Hello, Antonio. It's rather strange to be sat the other side of the camera for once, but I'm very glad to be here. So thank you.
Well, we did it once with me talking about my book, and in the future we're going to have to twist Antonio's arm to get him to talk about his brilliance with digital media. So we're looking forward to today.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. You've managed to drag me kicking and screaming in front of the questioning, so I'm ready when you are. So
Okay, great. Well, what we would like to do is for you to tell us a little bit about your background and your journey with dyslexia and how you got into the accessibility field as well. And then Antonio and I will go back and forth asking you really hard questions.
okay, I'm quaking in fear now. So I I actually found out I was dyslexic in my mid-20s. There's a history of it in my family. I'd basically been in denial until such point, and I was working for a company that actually provided solutions for people with dyslexia, and I joined that company because, well, A, I needed a job, but B, also because I knew it was in the family, so I was interested. But the more time I spent working with this company and learning about dyslexia, the more it felt like I needed to actually go and do something, because it was clear that a lot of the stuff that I was providing solutions for in terms of the customers were problems that I was myself facing. So that was how I got started. So I would be working for eAnsys, which is an assistive technology supplier, for a number of years when I finally got diagnosed, which was a great pleasure to a really good friend of mine who was one of the founders of the Adult Dyslexia Organization in the UK, because he'd been telling me that I was dyslexic for the past decade. So I'd finally admitted it, because before that he'd go, "You're dyslexic." I'm like, "No, I'm not. But where are my keys and my wallet? And why am I so disorganized and turning up on the wrong day?" So so absolutely, I came to it late in life. I think I'd managed to mask it quite well during my education. I had some bits where I struggled and got extra help, but hadn't really thought about it as dyslexia, and including during my first degree, because during that time I was privileged enough to go to Oxford, and most of the time you didn't actually have to submit that much written work. You'd actually have a one-to-one discussion with your tutor. So although you would produce the written work, you didn't actually have to submit it. You'd read it and discuss it. So most of the time I look at my scrawled crossings out and go through it with the tutor, and that was fine. So that worked really well for me. But it also masked the fact that I had an issue. I think things that really got me really interested were I got interested in computers, because I'd not really used computers at school. I was a couple of years too old to have access to them in school. My sister, 3 years younger, actually did, so it was really on the cusp. And basically, when I did come to start using computers in work, it was like a light bulb moment, really, because I was able to do things in a way that made my life a lot easier. Instead of handwriting stuff, I was able to use word processing packages and spell checkers and stuff like that. And I got really into computers, and I started building them myself. So, so when I went to work for Ian System, we were looking at speech recognition systems, and we were in the early days. This was around 2001, so speech recognition wasn't particularly well known at that time. I mean, it'd been around for a while, but it wasn't very well adopted. You had to do lots of things to make it work well, including building really powerful computers and looking at the innards of them to make sure that there wasn't interference, because all of these things could affect the speech recognition. So I sort of fell into my niche, and I count myself very lucky because I've really enjoyed working in the field. It's been 15 odd years now, and I enjoy every day of it. I learn something new every day, and it's really a pleasure and a privilege to work in accessibility and assistive tech.
So you're saying that you end up admitting or that no, after somebody was chasing you for 10 years, so you were also working with that type of software. So what was when you started admitting that and putting yourself in that position of acceptance, are you able to look at your customers and the people that were actually supposed to use that software? So what did something change after that, or what type of introspection happened in
Oh,
yourself?
there was plenty of introspection. I'm not ashamed to say that there were tears, because actually I was able to understand better and had a reason for why I was bad at certain things, which I'd struggled with my whole life. I think I've talked to Deborah before on her podcast about the fact that I kept failing to get promoted in a job that I was in because I just couldn't do the exams. It was working for a bookmakers, and I was kept getting put forward for the management exams by this company, which included lots of bet settling exams, which are complex equations, and I just flunked it every single time, and they couldn't work out why. So it had affected my career, but in many ways, I'm thankful that I didn't pass those exams, because I would have ended up getting promoted into a job that I didn't enjoy. But yeah, absolutely, it caused me to look at life very differently. I'd had periods where I'd been depressed previously, where yeah, I'd gone and sought treatment for depression because I didn't really understand certain things in my life. But I also thought, well, I've been to Oxford, I've got the joint honours degree. I can't possibly be dyslexic because my understanding of dyslexia was limited. Yeah, it was they're the thick kids in the class that get their B's and D's the wrong way around and can't read. Well, I could read. I just have issues with the reading fluency and with some of the things around writing and sequencing and stuff like that. So it was because of my lack of understanding of the complex nature of dyslexia that I denied that it was within me. As I spent time working with people and learning about dyslexia, it became much more obvious to me that this was something that was very close to home. So yeah, it was a journey, and it's one that I'm very glad that I've been on.
Now, you were also mentioned that the fact when you were starting to use computers, it was no, it was something completely new that happened, and you were able to improve the way how you were working, the way how you were able to communicate. So, if we go back in time to the to the early days of computing and today, what type of changes you see, and how do you see technology and the way how technology is going, helping people in terms of how they improve the way they communicate, and sometimes how they use technology to support them in their lives, facing sometimes disabilities that they don't even know that they have.
Yeah, okay. So my very first computing experiences were with a green screen monitor, and sort of practicing writing code, and you could load up games on a tape. I had an Amstrad PC with a whole 64K of RAM, and and obviously the way that you interact is very, very different. I've seen technology become much more human-centered over time, uh, from moving from command line interfaces to the graphical user interface to now natural language commands, and sort of much more fluid human to computer interaction. So you're able to to a certain extent, talk to your computer, talk to Cortana, talk to Siri, and get a half-decent response if you know what it is you're asking for. I think that over time it will become much more intuitive still. There's work going on in artificial intelligence and deep learning to make that kind of natural interaction become more reliable and robust, because it's not robust at the moment. But so it's changed significantly. And then, of course, in the early days, there were no discrete assistive technologies. You had things that have always been designed to improve people's lives, improve people's efficiency. And for me, desktop publishing was a really big thing. Because of the spell checker, because of the fact that I could type words instead and they were legible rather than my scrawl, because my writing's terrible. So so each time I've seen advances in technology, I've seen uses for that technology which has fallen outside of the intent of the original people that designed the technology. So optical character recognition, stuff like that. That wasn't originally designed as an assistive technology, but it's very useful for people who are blind. It's very useful for people who are dyslexic. It was designed originally with military uses in mind. Some of the best optical character recognition is Russian, and came out of the KGB. And it was designed to reconvert documents that had been photographed. So, but in our circumstances, we're now using optical character recognition for determining, what documents are there when you see images of text, etc. And I'd been working when I was still at Insys on a mobile product which allowed you to take pictures of things and have them converted into text-to-speech, etc. So the uses of the technology change as people see the capabilities of technology, they fit them to problems. I think there's also the other case whereby you shouldn't just invent a technology for technology's sake and then go out seeking problems to fit the technology to. I think it's more of a case of understanding the problem and then finding the appropriate solution.
Today we interact most of our time with screens, but there are a few examples in countries like Japan where you are interfacing with a robot that is able to react to your tone of voice, to the way how you react, and you are able to have some level of interaction. So how do you see those interactions going from screen to a different type of devices that we end up interacting with, and how important that would be in some situations?
I think there's going to be huge differences in modalities of use over the next 10, 15 years, and that we will get much more natural interfaces. I think that screens won't go away, not anytime soon, because they're kind of convenient and they're everywhere, and or surfaces, because I think that what you're also going to see is smart materials turn all kinds of surfaces into screens. And people like to consume stuff visually. That said, you can use gestures, and there's going to be a whole wide range. And I think it depends on the use case and the context, how you might interact. So yes, you may use robots. They're already using them in certain circumstances to interact with the elderly. So you've got elder care robots that are helping people stay connected, less lonely. You're able to train kids on how to, young adults rather, on how to manage with babies and so on and so forth. So I think there's a wide range of things that you might be able to do. Plus there's going to be loads of customer service bots everywhere. Now those bots are going to be simple at first. They're going to be mainly within messaging apps and so on. And I think that that we'll become quite used to using bots within messaging apps. The more sort of sci-fi movie-centric kind of picture of the robot as the humanoid kind of form is going to be further down into the future. Although though we will see some of them, but they will mainly be there to sort of prove the capabilities, I think, rather than be ubiquitous.
That's, it's interesting that you say that, Neil, because excuse me, I'm going to show my age, but it was funny, when I was a little girl watching the Jetsons and all the technology that was going to come, and it was going to make our lives so much easier, and it was just going to be so much fun, and all these really cool things would happen. And a lot of those things, besides, well, I guess Rosie the robot too, but that's how well I remember it. I remember the name of the robot, but it was supposed to make our lives easier. But what happened is it has made our lives easier, but it seems like technology rules us now. And speaking from someone who learned that I had ADHD later in life, I remember when I told both of you, you were like, Deborah, are you kidding me? You've been a card-carrying member of it with ADHD for many years. I'm surprised you didn't know it. But when you have a personality like mine that has access to tablets and iPhones and Android devices and PCs and social media, which I adore and love, how do we make sure that we have a balanced life? I don't know if any of us know this answer, but how do we make sure it improves our lives, right? Rather than doing what it's doing now. It's like I sometimes get stressed because I haven't checked Twitter in 2 hours, and
Yeah.
I think, geez, Deborah, stop it. So
Yeah.
what's your advice for us?
Yeah, the Twitter twitch. Yeah, absolutely. So I think you're talking to the wrong person, because I'm equally addicted,
Yeah,
and there's no point talking to Antonio either. So we're all guilty
I
as charged.
know, I know.
But I think,
Or Deborah Rue.
yeah. So yeah, technology has made certain things in life significantly easier, but it's also made it easier for companies to and employers and to fill that vacuum. And what's happened is, instead of giving us more time off, it's increased the expectations of our productivity. So instead of taking that and using it, your work-life balance, and increasing in favor of your life rather than your work, what's happened is the expectation is that you can be more productive and you can do more things. And to a certain extent, we've built that ourselves, because we've taken on more things. So we've seen the benefits of social media. We've taken on Access Chat and loaded ourselves up with a whole bunch of other stuff. So I think that it is
Guilty.
an issue. That I think that sometimes you do need to just step away, and to a certain extent I do that. I go and garden, or just do something physical rather than sat in front of the computer. But I'm well past due for a holiday, and I think
Yes.
that's something that everybody needs to do. But what you see now, and what I've been guilty of, is my phone's on holiday. I've got roaming on my phone. I'll run up that data charge, checking everything, so, or be sort of looking around anxiously trying to find the Wi-Fi hotspot. So I don't have the answer to that. I do think that things may change. I think there's going to be a fairly seismic shift as automation takes place at a much greater pace, that a lot of jobs are going to change, and that some of the really sort of day-to-day mundane tasks, it's going to be like industrialization all over again. All of the sort of manual stuff that we're doing now will shift, and a lot of it will be automated. And there's talk about sort of these sort of minimum incomes and people not necessarily having to work. But I know for one that I'll always be at the other end of the spectrum, trying to do stuff. It's when I'm not doing stuff that I'm worse. So I can't think of anything worse than not having stuff to do, because I get bored really, really easily. Like you, I'm sort of dyslexia, ADHD. There's a big overlap, and so I can't. My worst thing possible would be a week on a desert island, sort of 5-star hotel, because after day 2, I'd have swum all the lengths in the pool that I can swim. I'll have got bored with the book, and I'll have done the tour, and I'll be desperate to get a plane home.
Well, and I think it's interesting that we say there's going to, we're going to have so much more free time because certainly haven't seen it. And I know that Americans, God bless America, we are, we don't take our vacations. America, I think, is the worst country as far as the amount of people that are actually not even taking their vacations, which is terrible. And also, as a person that hasn't taken a vacation in a long time, I'm going to Cape Cod next week to see my beautiful niece Haley get married. But it is interesting and figuring out all these moving pieces. And I think it's about evolving. I was watching a show yesterday, Super Soul Sunday, one of my favorites, and she had Tony Robbins on there. And it's been interesting to me, a fan of Tony Robbins' work, because in the past he was so high. He's very high energy, and some of his earlier work, it didn't speak as much to me because it felt like I perceived it maybe as grasping and running, and I already do that a lot. So it was very interesting watching him in the interview and seeing how much he has evolved. He's just an amazing leader, and he talked about a lot of this. And he was talking, for example, about something I try to do to control my ADHD and the depression I work with, and I try to manage. And he was saying, taking 10 minutes a day to meditate. And he said on the interview, if you don't have 10 minutes, you don't have a life. And I thought, I have got to remember that. I actually took the time this morning to take 10 minutes, and it went into 20 minutes, and it really helped balance me. But I think all of us sort of are on that, how do we get off that treadmill? How do we contribute to society? How do we make a difference? But I want to say, and I was going to try to Google this while I was talking to you, and I didn't think I could pull it off, but I saw somewhere, and maybe one of you two remember this, there was some legislation or laws being written, and I can't remember if it was in the United States or somewhere else, where and maybe it's coming from Huffington Post. I forget now where it was, but they were actually putting policies in place that I think it is Huffington Post, that you cannot send emails or contact people or contact them in any ways during certain hours. It's forbidden. Is it in France? And I think Huffington Post is doing it too. Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, there are certainly policies, out of hours policies for emails and phone. You can opt out.
No, you can't opt out. No loopholes.
And another good one was that companies were actually, I think it was Bentley, or it was a large prestige car manufacturer that basically allowed employees to delete all of the emails received during holiday period. So you can go away and there'll be an out of office message that says, all of these messages will be deleted because I'm on holiday. If you need to contact me, get me when I get back.
Oh my God, I would love if we would do that. We have to learn to evolve to our technology so it doesn't control our lives. And, if we're not tweeting, am I all of a sudden not viable? Oh, Deborah, were you viable just because you were tweeting? So what's that about?
I was talking with a friend about a month ago and said, every time that I go on holidays, I get stressed 2 days before returning to work because I start thinking in the number of emails that I'm going to have on my inbox and how to deal with them. So sometimes the way how we work create this type of situations, and I think it's important for employers to find ways to contain this, to somehow protect their employees.
Sure.
in the way how they know, at least if they are on their time is preserved and they don't have to be on that tension when they are returning back to work and having that fear, oh, I'll be missing stuff because I was on holiday. So it's important to have that type of protection and find ways to avoid that burnout.
Oh, we've certainly created a culture where fear of missing out is a really big thing. but I think that ultimately, whilst I'm really bad at spending a lot of time doing stuff, I'm relatively good at not sweating the sort of, oh, I must be missing stuff. My issue is that I've overcommitted in that like you, Deborah, we've got a bunch of things that we want to do.
Yeah.
And we want to change the world. Absolutely, really want to make a difference to people with disabilities and to how we can make for a more inclusive culture. And that's in itself kind of addictive, and I'm quite driven to try and push it forward, which means that you volunteer, you put your hand up, you volunteer for stuff, and then suddenly, even though it's not a case of you fear of missing out, you've just committed yourself to oodles of work. So
I never do that. Yeah.
no, never.
God, I'm so bad about that. I'm
Who's
so
that?
bad about that.
Oh, instant regret. Yeah, I know. So, so I guess that kind of leads us on a bit. I know you wanted to talk about sort of the future, and I know we talked a bit about bots and so on, but I think where I see some really interesting stuff happening is in the crossover space between medical and assistive devices, because I think that this is a really interesting area. So to a certain extent, we've steered clear of medical, and especially in the sort of industry we're in, we sort of almost go, oh, social model, can't talk about medical devices, can't talk about them because that's not the social model, and we're dehumanizing people with disabilities. But there's this thing happening within medicine right now where medicine is no longer something that you take, it's something that helps you supplement yourself. So it's IT. You've got ingestible IT. You've got nanotechnologies that are going to be injected into your bloodstream that might repair parts of your heart. We're already using gene technology and other bits and pieces to restore people's vision. So the boundaries are very much blurred now between what happens between assistive tech and medical tech, and so I'm interested in some areas where how do they interact? How do you make sure that the smart nanotechnology that you've got inside you, which is monitoring your heart rate and your blood cholesterol and your diabetes, connects with your wearable, which also,
Right.
if you happen to be blind because you've got diabetic retinopathy, uses text to speech. So how do you bring all of this into one ecosystem? So I think those are going to be interesting challenges, and it's quite exciting. And then the whole idea of augmented humans and not just augmented reality, but what we could possibly do to ourselves, and the whole cyborg thing.
Right.
So that's kind of exciting too. Bit scary. Not sure where I sit on that one. So I know Ray Kurzweil's busy popping the vitamin pills, trying to stay alive long enough for the singularity. I think I'm with Elon Musk in that I think there need to be some constraints on robots. We need to sort of have the Asimov's rules, the laws of robotics, to be there to make sure that we don't create something that has enormous potential for good, but it also has enormous potential for harm. So those are areas where I think it's really interesting time to be alive.
I agree. And Neil, I thought of a couple of things when you were talking. We in the United States have actually used, we killed a man that was shooting at our police officers and actually killed 6 policemen with a robot. And there was, a lot of controversy around that. I personally don't think, you should be killing anybody, certainly police officers. So it was a really bad situation, and we don't know that that particular example, if a lot more people wouldn't have gotten killed because this man was killing people. So I think there's some real things that we need to think about. I also think you bring wonderful points up about, you know, the medical and all of it coming together. And I think there's so much to do as well, and for each of us trying to figure out what does it mean for us individually. I'll give you a personal example. My husband we've been married. We'll be married 33 years, maybe 34 years, in September. And I still really love him. I think he's a great guy. And he has been on a statin medication to prevent a heart attack for years, probably before our children were born. And Sarah, our oldest, is 29 years old. I started noticing over the past few years that he was having a harder time really solving with his problem-solving skills, and I started noticing cognitive issues, and it was really scary. And I didn't talk to anybody about it because some deep fears came up, and actually him and we wound up getting in some fights about it and debates, and but I could tell something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. And then I was talking to a friend of mine about something else, and he's a very good friend of both of mine and my husband Ed, and I told him what was happening, and he said, "Deborah, he's not on statins, is he?" And I'm like, well, yeah, that's the only drug that he takes is a statin. He's very healthy. And he said in a very tiny percent of men, some men experience these sort of cognitive issues, problem-solving issues and stuff with statins. And so I started doing some research, and we talked to our doctor, and they said it's rare, but it is possible. And so here we are taking a medication to prevent something, right, that you discussed, and it's actually interfering with his brain, right? And I'm not saying it happens to everybody, but so he actually went off statins, and everything is improved. It's like my husband's back. And so I think it's a very complicated topic. You take all of that, you take the bots, you take how we're doing the medication, how we're learning. We're very complicated species. As you mentioned, you know, Ray Kurzweil, who's such a genius and has been so powerful for our industry, trying to figure out if I eat less, if I take more vitamins, and all the things that we're doing, there is still astounding what we don't know about the human body. It's just amazing what we don't know. And it's exciting, but I think we need to learn from, you know, what happened in the past as well.
I think you're right. I think that with drugs, there's an awful lot that affects mood and people's brain chemistry that's been very little understood. So, for instance, really common drugs like antihistamines have a huge effect on people's mood, and yet people don't think about it. The fact that they can cause people to get very angry or very depressed.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, these are common hay fever medicines that people are popping without thinking about it at all. And so, and of course, you know, they won't understand why. And obviously people on the receiving end don't understand why. So there's a lot more to do in that space. And I think that I'm a real believer in systems theory. I believe that we can't separate things out into silos because everything's interconnected. We live in an interconnected world. So we're constantly discovering.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Well, Neil, a few things before we wrap up. First of all, some of you might have noticed that Antonio seems to have an extra arm today, and he's in Portugal with his beautiful Beatrice, and we were just wondering if he had turned the camera over so our audience... Hola! I'm speaking Spanish. Hi, beautiful girl.
Wave. Let's see.
She's loved having Daddy in town. Oh. And of course, we also have to introduce Beatrice to our mascot, Bon Bon. And I'm hoping that Neil will have Bon Bon ready for our viewers to see beautiful Beatrice. And Bon Bon.
There you go.
Our mascot, our Access Chat mascot, who's so patient with us.
He's very patient.
I had to, while we were here, I had to throw in some personal stuff. But
Oh yeah.
Antonio, do you want to ask Neil one more question, and then we'll let Neil give us his final thoughts. But the reason why I've been bugging Neil to do this is because he's such a brilliant guy, and I love the way his brain works, and so I knew he was going to be amazing. Back to you,
No,
Antonio.
no, I've been looking to panels from many different conferences in the area of technology, and also it's extremely rare to have someone there that may have that could have a more philosophic approach in relation to technology. So sometimes I feel that there's a lack of thinkers in those panels to have those discussions. So what do you think about that now?
I agree.
Oh, so without wanting to upset most of my future panel partners, I would say that there definitely is a tendency to try and bring people on that are going to either talk about their product or talk about one specific topic. I think where, again, as a systems thinker, I think I can add value is really around the idea that everything's interconnected, and being a completely random dyslexic out of the box kind of thinker, I think that does add value. I'm open to ideas. I think that we all are, and I think that openness is something that's useful in this period of incredible change. We're living through a period where things are changing more rapidly than even in our parents' generation. The pace of change is continuing to accelerate. So we have to be open. I think that this is something that luckily we're born open. I sort of being dyslexic, I was born open in terms of my way of thinking, and Deborah, I think you were too.
Yeah.
But that's something that society is going to have to learn, and that's something that I think will be really interesting to watch. Yeah, learn to be
I agree.
learn to be a scatterbrain like me. So thank you for putting me through.
Well, or I will say this instead. I know that you're just teasing when you say that, but I think learning to understand the values that a brain like yours brings to the conversation, that is what is important to society.
Mm-hmm.
Because you had dyslexia, you did not know about it, and maybe it doesn't matter, but you learned to work around what some people see as flaws, and they now are your superpowers. I mean, you are a really brilliant man that's contributing a lot to the world, and it's because of that. That's at least, I mean, that's part of who you are. So I think that we have a lot to look forward to in the future, and we need the Neil Millikens in these conversations. So that's why I'm proud to have both you and Antonio as my partners. So Neil, thank you so much for letting us try to embarrass you on Access Chat today. You're amazing, and we are your fans, aren't we, Antonio?
True. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, thank you, Neil, once again. Goodbye.
Thanks, Beatrice.